Good afternoon, everyone. It is Saturday, May the 23rd, 2020. It is currently 1:44 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from Victory Baptist Church, located here in Ovalo, Texas. I hope you are having a great Saturday. I came out here I won't even talk about my Saturday, okay? I won't even talk about it. I was supposed to be here around 10:30 this morning. And it's now fast approaching 2 p.m., so let's just say the morning hasn't gone the way as planned. In fact, I came out here and my whole goal for coming out here was, all right, I'm going to go out to the church. I may find an audio that I can use for the VBC Bible Institute and just kind of play that live. And while that's playing, and then I can work on stuff for church tomorrow. So I started getting everything ready to do that. And I'm like, well, no, in the VBC Bible Institute, we're still in Genesis 1. The audio that I have that I can play because we've been given copyright permission, well, that starts in Genesis 2. I don't really want to do that yet, so I'll wait. So then I'm like, okay, well, that messes up my plan. So then I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. Then I just kind of sat down, started going through my podcasts, all the different podcasts that I listen to. I'm like, wait, what did that say? Wait. What did they talk about? And then I had to go back and look at the title. I'm like, oh no. Okay. So, well, now the plan has been made for me. I had a plan, but now the plan has been made for me because as I was going through all of my podcasts looking, I saw the title of a podcast dealing with the subject of QAnon. Remember that? Do you remember QAnon? Remember on May the 21st, I know you remember just a few days ago, I did a very long podcast, well over an hour, entitled, Is QAnon the Newest American Religion? Is QAnon the newest American religion? And if you go to the theologycentral.net blog, theologycentral.net, once you get to that webpage, look for the blog section, theologycentral.net. That's theologycentral.net. Once you get there, go to the blog section. I posted two things there in relation to QAnon. A podcast that is spending a lot of their time covering this QAnon phenomenon. I posted an article talking about it. And then, of course, you can go back to the May 21st episode of the Theology Central podcast, and you can listen to me spend over an hour talking about it. QAnon, this thing that kind of started out as a conspiracy theory, has now kind of moved into the church, and now there's QAnon churches. And so I really started talking about, we need to pay attention to this. We need to be looking out for this. Something's going on. This is transferring over. And now it's beginning to impact, what people who would refer to themselves as Christians. You've got a QAnon churches, and they're calling for people to now start home congregations to spread this message of Q, this idea of QAnon. And I'm like, we got to be paying attention. Well, lo and behold, guess what? I'm not the only one thinking we need to be talking about this, because I was going through my podcast feed and I came to my podcast, one of the podcasts I listened to, Issues, etc., talking about issues that facing the church. Now, they come at things from a Lutheran theological perspective, but they still are very informative. And guess what they did? They did a discussion on evangelicals and the conspiracy theory of QAnon. Wait, that's evangelicals. Oh, wait, see, they're tying the two together as well. You got the QAnon conspiracy theory, and now it's showing up in the evangelical world. So we need to pay attention. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen. I've not listened to this yet. We're going to listen to it together, and then I'll offer my analysis, and I'll see if they agree with my perspective, if they offer a different perspective, if we need to disagree with their perspective, or I may add to their perspective. But again, this is something I started telling people to pay attention to, and now other people are doing the same thing, which tells me I may have been onto something. Maybe. I know sometimes when I turn on the microphone and I start talking about things, I can almost imagine people around the world going, really? That's what he's talking about? That's a waste of time. But I I think that sometimes I'm pretty good at kind of seeing where things are going. Sometimes, maybe you may disagree with that, but we're going to talk about this, and we'll listen and we'll see what they have to say, and well, let's just see where it goes. Are you ready? It's a Saturday afternoon. QAnon, evangelicals, conspiracy theories, what's happening to the church. We've been talking about all of these things. Let's see what Issues, etc. had to say about it. Here we go.
You've heard our open themes with listeners talking about their vocations.
Missouri dairy farmers love Issues, etc.
And what they're doing while listening to Issues, etc.
This is Mark from Michigan, and I am a lawnmower listener. We love Issues, etc.
We're looking for more of these elements to include in our open themes. Tell us about your vocation, hobby, or what you do while listening to Issues, etc. Call the Issues, etc. comment line 24/7 at 618-223-8382. If you make a mistake, just start over. 618-223-8382. Thanks for listening, and thanks for contributing to Issues, etc. 618-223-8382.
Should we do that with the Theology Central podcast? Should I create a number you can call and leave a message, and then I take that recording and play it in our opening? Some of you don't even hear our professional opening. Unless you are listening to us via Spreaker, you don't even get to hear that professional opening. We have a professional opening, people. Come on. And no one has yet to email me going, hey, love your opening. Love that. I haven't, so I don't even know if it was worth creating. We could create a different opening. We could. If you got a suggestion, we could. Now, it does cost money. I don't remember how much it is per word for them to create it. It's not super expensive, but if you add along, and that's why our intro is pretty short and to the point, because the more words, the more money it costs. They did give us a very big discount for the first one. I've thought about creating openings for all the podcast, but it gets into, I don't know. So, I guess we could just have people call in and go, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I listen to Theology Central, and I'm a truck driver, or I'm a, whatever. I'm whatever you are. I guess we could do that, I guess. But then do you get paid per word? Do you get, no, you don't. No. Okay. I guess I would. But then we would need music, or we just forgo the music. I don't know. Here we it's interesting. You'll notice some podcast apps now have, I think, a skip the intro function. Button where you can tap and skip the intro. Well, if people are going to start skipping the intros to podcasts, then why even create them? Why even spend all the time and effort to create them? Just get to the content, right? Right? Does intros even matter? I think there was a time in podcasting where people thought it was cool, especially if you're kind of a nobody, you could create a professional intro relatively cheap, or if you had a little bit of technical expertise, you could do it yourself, and you could come across sounding super, super professional. But I don't know if anyone really cares anymore. So that's kind of an interesting development. Change your intro now to having your listeners call in and they be a part of it. Maybe I need to develop something like that, or maybe we just need to say, hey, this Theology Central podcast, you know what you're listening to. Let's get started. All right. I don't know. I would probably get 100 different answers if people start emailing me with their thoughts. But here we go. Let's get back. We haven't really got very far yet, but I just thought that was interesting. Here we go.
Conspiracy theories seem to be part of the fabric of American life. They have been for some time. They are great in variety, but they are resilient as well. When one is defeated or falls out of favor, another one pops up to take its place. The latest that has been getting the attention of The Atlantic is a conspiracy theory called QAnon. What is it, and what does it have to do with American evangelicalism, if anything? Welcome back.
All right, let's jump in really quick. He phrased it that, conspiracy theories are kind of, a part of American life. And there may be truth to that. But for me, I've stated it a million times, so let me state it, one more time. I'm not concerned what the American culture is doing. I'm concerned, I want to keep up with what the American culture is doing, but it doesn't bother me. If the American culture is out there coming up with conspiracy theories and they want to dedicate their hour after hour thinking about conspiracy theories, believing in conspiracy theories, okay, more power to them. But it's when it gets into the church, that's when I get bothered. That's when I get concerned, because we are Christians. We should care about truth, promoting the truth, and we have a commission. We're supposed to be out there trying to make people disciples, evangelizing people, teaching people, being salt and being light. When we get preoccupied, I think conspiracy theories in the church is just a tactic to distract us from what we're supposed to be doing. And we seem to fall for it over and over and over and over again. And I don't know, and I've stated it in some capacity. I think many cases the reason, and I keep trying to, there's certain issues that keep coming up over the last few months, maybe even for most of 2020. I just feel like in some ways I keep saying the same thing in different ways, but that's probably because I believe it's important. I think part of the issue, the why Christians get so distracted by conspiracy theories, and we get into all of that, and we want to start arguing, and we get caught up in politics. I've stated it. Let me state it again. I think because we have become dissatisfied, and there's a lack of contentment when it comes to the Word of God, to serving God. I think we're no longer content with God. We're looking for something else. We're looking for something else more exciting. We're looking for different answers. And I think there's a spiritual problem. I think all of these distractions that the church is embracing is demonstrating that they don't love God's word. They're not passionate about God's word. They're not committed to the Great Commission, that there's all these other things they would rather do. And I think that all of these are issues related to a spiritual problem, which ultimately creates a form of idolatry where we turn to God and we're no longer worshiping the true God. And I think we just need to continue these issues are deeper than a conspiracy theory. It's why would a Christian who has 66 books to study, to read, to pray, people to minister to, a world that is dying and going to hell that you need to be trying to evangelize, Christians all around you who are biblically illiterate, theologically illiterate, that you should be pouring your life into to try to disciple and try to help, all of these things you're supposed to be doing. It's like, no, we're done with all of that. We're going to go do something else now. And I think that's why you see all of these distractions in the church. All right, here we go.
Issues, etc. We're going to be talking about that Atlantic story about evangelicals and the conspiracy theory called QAnon. Terry Mattingly is our guest. He's senior fellow at the Overby Center at the University of Mississippi. He's author of the weekly On Religion column for the Universal Syndicate and the book Pop Goes Religion. He's also founder and editor of Get Religion. Terry, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
Is this QAnon controversy real in terms of evangelical life?
It certainly is. The question is this a group of people who are somehow preying on evangelical culture, or has this conspiracy actually grown out of evangelical culture? Or then I can put another layer on this. Has it somehow become typical of evangelical culture? Those are three very radically different statements. And this article that ran at the Atlantic comes really close to saying that the movement is essentially defined by evangelicals for evangelicals. The problem there is that we never really get anything, plus or minus, from any major evangelical leaders in terms of what they think of this conspiracy, what they agree with it, what they disagree with it. There's basically no content in this article that is drawn from evangelical authorities. That's kind of strange when you're saying that this is a huge, massive conspiracy that is sunk into evangelical culture.
Now, I've got to throw in my 2 cents here. If you are an evangelical Christian, and I would really love to get your email on this, if you are an evangelical Christian, at any point in your Christian life, do you care what evangelical leaders say? Are you influenced by what evangelical leaders say? Do you get your marching order from evangelical leaders? The very nature of evangelicalism is individualism. Everyone kind of believes their own thing and does their own thing. So something could have a very firm hold and arises within evangelicalism, is greatly influential within evangelicalism, and is growing and spreading, and you don't have one evangelical leader saying a word about it. Because I don't think a lot of evangelicals really, you've got lots of evangelicals who can't even name you, like, okay, give me some names of top Christian podcasts or top, what's the most influential churches, and who are the most influential evangelical leaders. I think you could have millions of churchgoers who would be like, I don't know. I don't listen to Christian podcasts. I don't know. I don't read any of these books. They don't have a clue what's going on in the evangelical world. So in other words, if an evangelical leader says it is or isn't, it's irrelevant. It's what's happening in the pew. It's what's happening in the small group. It's what's happening in Christian homes. It's what Christians are talking about on social media. That's really what you find out what's going on within evangelicalism. You don't find out by listening to the leaders. I think that that's just a wrong perspective. It's what's going on within the church. You can have evangelical leaders saying all kinds of things. It's like, no, what's really going on? What's really going on? Okay. And you got to start listening to Christians. What are they talking about? What are they posting? Now, I will argue whether QAnon and its pure form is very evangelical. We do know this. The political hijacking of the church, and QAnon is very political. The political hijacking of the church has been going on for a very long time, and it has reached a pandemic level. It has spread throughout evangelicalism, and you have the church now that is more politically driven, politically ideologically driven. It's not biblical wisdom. It's political ideology. It's not a biblical frame of reference. It's a political frame of reference. Christians spend their time getting into arguments about political battles, left versus right, liberal versus conservative, progressive versus, conservative, all these things, Republican, Democrat, all of this political hijacking is there. And I think the political hijacking of the church was the ground that was fertile for the planting of something like QAnon. All right. I think the political hijacking, which I have been warning about, that was the soil which something like QAnon could be planted and take root and begin to spread. And it doesn't matter what one evangelical leader has to say. You know what? How Christians were, and then who declares someone to be an evangelical leader? Who declares them to be a leader? You can say that person is an evangelical leader. And guess what? Any evangelical who doesn't agree with that leader says he's wrong and I'm going to do what I want to do. We don't get any marching orders from any evangelical leaders. How influential are the so-called evangelical leaders really are? How influential are they really are to the average Christian? I would say barely any. And guess what? Christians, evangelicals, just run around and pick whichever leader they like. And then they get their influence. It's them influencing themselves. They just go pick out, oh, I like that person. He's he's the one who's going to influence me. But the minute that leader says something they don't like, they'll throw him to the side. They'll cast him away like yesterday's garbage. If that leader does something they don't like or makes a mistake or falls, boom, they're done. They throw him away and they just run to the next person. So I question the whole evangelical leadership. I just question that whole mindset. Maybe I'm wrong. So I don't think we can really understand the spread of QAnon by looking for what evangelical leaders have said. Listen to church members, right? Listen to what they're saying. Listen to them talk. You may not hear QAnon. You may hear something similar. I think I was warning a long time ago that Alex Jones was becoming influential within Christianity. He's not an evangelical leader. So no evangelical leader would talk about Alex Jones. But guess what? Church members were. Churches were getting together and watching his videos. Yeah, that's what you look for. All right, here we go.
So very few, a minority of Americans know what this is because it's kind of a troll-like internet-based thing. But how would you summarize what the theory is, the QAnon theory?
Well, you have this mysterious source named Q who is out there in what people call the dark web. And these are very obscure parts of the web, but they are followed by thousands of people. And Q mixes lots of religious language in with his conspiratorial political views. Now, there are even people who think Q is Donald Trump himself. But the dominant view seems to be that Q is some sort of former intelligence official in the U.S. government, and thus he knows secret things, and he's always telling people, you won't believe what's going to happen next. There's more here than meets the... In other words, it's typical conspiracy theory stuff. Now, what I think this article does a very good job of is showing that this thing is real, with the quotes from it, with influence, with signs that there are people kind of linked to Trump administration life. The degree to which they're linked depends on how much you accept the conspiracy, that are a part of this. It also, I think, does a good job in showing that there are serious issues here for evangelicals to worry about, because it quotes run-of-the-mill evangelicals that the author has run into in his research, kind of what I would call grassroots-level evangelicals, who clearly have bought into this. And I've been taking a lot of heat on Twitter for my criticism of this article, mainly from left-of-center evangelicals who are very concerned about this trend. And you know what? I think they should be very concerned about this trend. They missed what my primary concern was about the article. If you know anything about evangelical culture, you know that it is a movement that generation after generation is defined primarily by its authority figures. In other words, there isn't a bulletproof evangelical creed written somewhere. You may remember that years ago I interviewed Billy Graham, and Billy Graham told me that he had no idea what the word evangelical means. And I told him that was crazy because he's one of the people who would define it. We got into a discussion, and he said, well, whatever evangelical means, you have to define it in terms of doctrine. Well, once again, in this article, what we have here is an attempt to define evangelicalism primarily in terms of political culture, in terms of political conspiracies, and by a few concepts in evangelical life and culture. You know, obviously, the second coming is in the creed, but evangelicals in the 20th century took sections of prophecy and other things in a couple of books like The Late Great Planet Earth and a couple of Million Left Behind sales, and you've got a kind of unique view of the apocalypse and of millennialism and the second coming and the end of the world, and that's unique in corners of evangelicalism. I don't think this author realizes that that is not a common theme that unites evangelicals, or that just because you believe in the second coming doesn't mean that you believe that there are passages in Revelation that tell you how many Israeli Harrier jets can land on the head of a pin. This article needed sourcing from people who spoke fluent evangelical. And this article, most of all, in my opinion, needed insights into the QAnon conspiracy and its threats from major evangelical leaders who are criticizing it, who believe this is, in effect, a new heresy that has burst out of conspiracy theory land on the internet. This article at one point says this could be a new religion. This literally could be a new religion movement. Yet at the same time, it says this movement is defined by evangelical language and ideas. So which is it? Is it some sort of expression of things within mainstream evangelicalism, or is it some people preying on evangelicals as a part of a political conspiracy? If you know anything about the alt-right, you know that the alt-right, of which this may be some sort of variation, the alt-right definitely includes religious people who use religious language. But there are large parts of the alt-right that are completely secular in their orientation. And they may be people who claim they're Christians, but if you follow it down, they have no links whatsoever to mainstream evangelical institutions, colleges, seminaries, publishing houses, broadcast ministries, all those things that kind of define the cultural movement of evangelicalism. This same article doesn't show ties to any of those institutions either, yet it's portrayed as an evangelical culture instead of maybe a tiny evangelical subculture that's mixed up with a bunch of secular politics. It's all confusing, but it's pretty confusing when you read about conspiracy theories.
Now, this conversation to me is fascinating, because you really are getting into an issue here. How do you define evangelicalism? How do you define evangelicalism? What is evangelicalism? Look, there is no doctrine that unifies evangelicals. There isn't. Because there's very little unity on any doctrinal matters. Now, someone say, well, there's some agreement on some major ones. You can throw out some major ones and possibly get some agreement. But just a little bit of clarification, a little bit of adding some language, you'll find out that what appeared to be agreement can radically turn into disagreement very, very quickly. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with salvation, doesn't matter if you're dealing with the Lord's Supper, doesn't matter if you're dealing with baptism, how the church should function. You're going to get you've got a lot of things that put themselves under the umbrella of evangelicalism. And again, I don't know if there's any way to define it. And I don't know if evangelicalism is defined by its leadership. I'm having a hard time with this idea. I think evangelicalism is very individualistic. Each church does its own thing. Each Christian, you can have an evangelical who goes to a quote-unquote evangelical church who will say, I disagree with this, and this, because they're going to do things their way. So I don't know if this is this something, and I do agree that we need to ask the question, is QAnon something else? Is it a new religion that is going to come in? I mean, obviously it's somehow connected to evangelicalism. So is it a new heresy that's going to come into the church and begin to corrupt the church? Or is it something that arose from within? I will argue, this is going to be my theory. Because of the political hijacking of evangelicalism and of Christianity, all right, listen to American Family Radio from about 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday if you want to hear the political hijacking of Christianity. It's right there. That was the soil where something like QAnon could grow from. So I'm going to argue it kind of arose from within evangelicalism. It may have had a brief moment where it was outside of it, but it was embraced quickly. And now how widespread it is, how big of a threat, I do not know. And I do agree that we do need at least those who speak evangelical language. I think we do need that to be present in trying to deal with this issue. But I think evangelicalism, it's hard to define. It's hard to define it. It's hard to see it. I mean, typically evangelicalism just covers a lot of things. You know, basically there's the Catholic Church. Okay. There's the Greek Orthodox Church. Maybe there's the Episcopalians. Wait, now there's the evangelicals. I think, and then that can be made up of all kinds of different people. So I think within evangelicals, you have different subs. I think you have evangelicalism as a catch-all phrase, right? Evangelical is a catch-all phrase. And then underneath that catch-all phrase, you have all kinds of different flavors and groups, and they all have their own leaders. And I think it's hard to really define it. But somewhere within all of that, all of those little subgroups, you find, where something like QAnon can begin to grow and spread. All right, let's continue.
If conspiracy theories are consistent about anything, it's vague, smoke-blowing confusion, and the Q people certainly use a lot of that.
Terry Mattingly is our guest. We're talking about an Atlantic story about evangelicals and a conspiracy theory called QAnon. So of the three choices, it either comes from evangelicalism or it has kind of infected evangelicalism, or it's typical of evangelicalism, which position does the Atlantic story end up with? We'll answer that after this.
In sickness and in health, in these days of coronavirus panic, people are learning how difficult keeping this vow can be. The May issue of the Lutheran Witness looks at the wedding day. How does the couple plan their wedding with their pastor in a way that points to Christ, the only one by whom and through whom they can keep these impossible wedding vows? Read all about how Christ keeps his church in sickness and in health in the Lutheran Witness. Subscribe at cph.org/witness. The Lutheran Witness, interpreting the contemporary world from a Lutheran perspective.
Have you ever wondered if your investments could do more? I mean, a whole lot more? This is Rahema Kavuga, Synod Relations Manager of Lutheran Church Extension Fund. When you invest with us, you not only earn a competitive interest rate, but your investment goes to strengthen Lutheran Church Missouri Synod church workers, congregations, schools, and organizations through low-cost loans and services. To learn more, visit lcef.org/invest101.
Deaconesses are women trained to share the gospel of Jesus Christ through works of mercy, spiritual care, and teaching of the Christian faith. The word deaconess means servant. Find out more on how you can serve in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod through the vocation of deaconess at lcms.org/deaconess. Working in faith, laboring in love, remaining steadfast in the hope of our Lord Jesus Christ. LCMS Deaconess Ministry. lcms.org/deaconess.
Sanctifying your vocations with the Word of God. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
Many Lutheran pastors outside of the U.S. receive little or no seminary education. Luther Academy provides theological triage through conferences, books, and journals. Help support Luther Academy by making a tax-deductible donation at lutheracademy.com or call 260-452-2211. Serving Lutheran pastors to the ends of the earth. Luther Academy, 260-452-2211 or lutheracademy.com.
Lutheran Federal Credit Union serves the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod community with car and personal loans, mortgages, credit cards, checking and savings accounts. Lutheran FCU supports LCMS organizations with its Spotlight Ministry program, and Lutheran Federal Credit Union allows you to make purchases with Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay using your digital wallet. Learn more at lutheranfcu.org. Good for you, good for the church. Lutheran Federal Credit Union, lutheranfcu.org.
Despair says nobody cares, and that's not true.
Dr. Christian Kincaid, author of the Issues, Etc. Book of the Month for May, Living with Grief, Bound by Sorrow, Wrapped in Comfort.
And despair says there's no hope for me, and that's not true. To despair is not of God.
Learn more about living with grief at issuesetc.org or by calling Concordia Publishing House 1-800-325-3040.
It's just funny. I have to jump in. It's just funny sometimes listening to Christian radio, just how big of business Christianity is. You mean we got a Lutheran credit union. We have, you send donations for this, and it's just so much money and business and money and business. It's just, I don't know. I don't want to get off on that, but it's just, sometimes when you listen, it does seem just so weird. But all right, here we go. Let's finish this discussion on QAnon and see what he has to say.
Welcome back to Issues, Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. We're talking about an Atlantic story about evangelicals and a conspiracy theory called QAnon. Terry Mattingly is our guest. He's senior fellow at the Overby Center at the University of Mississippi, author of the weekly On Religion column for the Universal Syndicate and the book Pop Goes Religion, and he's founder and editor of Get Religion. So Adrian LaFrance writes this Atlantic story about this. You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that kind of three possibilities. Which of those three is, if you had to choose one, and if you could kind of set this out from the article itself, if you had to choose one, which one does LaFrance finally land on?
I really can't figure that out. I've had people yelling at me for saying that I implied that the article said all of evangelicalism is into this. No, it doesn't say that. What it says, though, is that this strange QAnon sect, let's call it, is defined by evangelical language and by evangelical concerns. And then it never says, meanwhile, what do mainstream evangelicals think of this article? I think evangelical leaders need to read this article because many of them, frankly, will not have heard of QAnon. And it's kind of hard to say that it's dominating evangelicalism if there are many mainline leaders who haven't even heard of it.
Now, okay, take a deep breath. If you're an evangelical leader and you're so quote-unquote leading evangelicals, wouldn't you have some responsibility to know what's going on? How could you be an evangelical leader and not hear? I knew of QAnon, I don't even know how long ago. I mean, I've been keeping up with it. And then when it kind of started showing up in kind of, QAnon churches and they're calling for, for home congregations, that's when I'm like, okay, I've got to address this. Now, before, when I would probably talk about conspiracy theories before they really had a religious implication, I probably would have talked about it even further back. But I'm trying to make sure, I'm trying desperately, because I've seen this before. I learned this a long, long time ago, that if I would do a podcast, do an episode of the News in Focus or whatever podcast, and discuss, some crazy conspiracy theory, just something like that, man, I'd get 3,000, 5,000, 20,000, 30,000 downloads. And I'd be like, woo, I'm on to something. Well, I wasn't really on to anything because guess what? These were Christians who didn't want to hear theology or the Bible. They wanted to hear all that other stuff. And I was really contributing to the distraction. I was actually helping the distraction. Now, I thought I could just talk about all kinds of stuff. Now I kind of want to talk about, I still want to talk about all kinds of stuff, but try to really bring in the theological implication even more so and say, hey, don't be distracted by this. But if you are an evangelical leader and you don't even know QAnon, don't even know what's going on, don't even know its religious implications, that is concerning because you're supposed to be the leader. And again, I don't know who the leaders are. Who are my evangelical leaders? I don't know who my leaders are. I need to know who my leaders are. I don't know who they are because I don't really have them. Again, that would be the average Christian. It would be interesting how many Christians can honestly say that there's an evangelical that's truly influential to them, that's leading them. I don't know, but what can you say? Here we go.
Or if they have heard about it, they certainly haven't addressed it publicly. I accept, based on what I've heard from friends and other people in the last couple of days, that they've seen signs of QAnon fascination out in their churches, and they're worried about it, and I would say they should be. But let me read you a couple of pieces from this article that give you a sense of what this sounds like. Here's a passage where they're talking to an activist out in Ohio. This had been something she was reluctant to speak about at first. Now she said, I feel God led me to Q. I really feel like God pushed me in this direction. I feel like if it was deceitful in my spirit, God would be telling me, enough's enough. But I don't feel that. I pray about it. I've said, Father, should I be wasting my time on this? And I don't feel that feeling that I should stop.
Now, see, right there, that's the problem with evangelicalism. That kind of thinking, I don't even believe that's evangelical. I don't even believe that's Christian. I believe that's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I'm going to wait till I get a feeling. I'm going to pray. And, I don't feel that God is telling me this is deception. I don't feel. What are you talking about? You don't wait for a feeling. You look for facts. You look for evidence. Okay, it's not about feelings. Feelings are misleading. Okay, that right there, I don't call that evangelicalism. I call that way of thinking charismatic theology. And the fact that charismatic theology is now just has infiltrated and corrupted all of quote unquote evangelicalism. I don't want anything even to do with evangelicalism because it's basically charismatic light. I don't want anything to do with charismatic theology. I don't want to do with anything in the evangelical world that's been corrupted, smells, or even looks like charismatic theology. That's why I'm outside of that entire, I don't fit in anywhere. I don't fit in with the evangelical world. I definitely don't fit in the charismatic world. And half the time, I don't fit in the reform world. Sometimes I don't think I fit in anywhere, which is a whole new podcast that I want to do, a whole new episode that I want to do on that. But so just when you hear people talk like that, I'm not worried about her pursuing Q and believing God led her to Q. And my issue there is not QAnon. My issue is she's so theologically confused, she needs spiritual help. QAnon is not the issue there. Her theological confusion, that she thinks that somehow God is going to guide and lead and speak in all kind of this weird mystical way. No, he's going to lead and speak through his word. You study it. You figure it out. You don't wait for feelings. Man, it's so just drives me crazy. But that language is literally corrupted all of Christianity at large. And I don't know how we fix it. All right, here we go.
Now, that's pretty evangelical language. I've known lots of people who heard God's Spirit telling them all kinds of things. In the ancient church, that's the sort of thing you took to your priest and others and tried to figure it out. Then later, you have a major outside source comes in. And listen once again to this. Arthur Jones, the director of the documentary film Feels Good Man, told me that QAnon reminds him of his childhood growing up as an evangelical Christian in the Ozarks. He said that many people he knew then and many people he meets now in the most devout parts of the country are deeply interested in the book of Revelation and trying to unpack all of its pretty hard to decipher prophecies. Jones went on, I think the same kind of person would all of a sudden start pulling at the threads of Q and start feeling like everything is starting to fall into place and make sense. If you're an evangelical and you look at Donald Trump on face value, he lies, he steals, he cheats, he's been married multiple times, he's clearly a sinner. But you are trying to find a way that he is somehow part of God's plan. Wow, that paragraph wanders all over the place. I mean, if you're trying to figure out what role God may be playing in the Trump era, then I guess that makes you adjacent to QAnon. But then meanwhile, I mean, how many other political movements and political conspiracies and wild ideas have been associated with the second coming just in like the last 50 years of evangelical and fundamentalist life? This is not something that popped out of the book of Daniel in the Trump era. If you know anything about evangelicalism, you know that these sorts of wild hares have been running around for a long time. So does that mean that evangelical Protestant language, ideas, and doctrines are the X factor in this growing threat to American life and culture? I don't think the article makes that case. I think it does make a great case that these people are real. They're selling this to some people, and I think it needs to make a case that evangelical leaders would have strong comments they would want to make about this threat and about this kind of movement. And sure enough, in the wake of the Atlantic article, there have some pieces that have come out and some things I'll be quoting in a follow-up piece that'll go later with this podcast. I also think it's crucial that it's in the Atlantic. And the Atlantic, of course, is a name brand in elite media. It's a magazine that in recent years, evangelicalism have come to trust in some way because, of the writing of Emma Green, someone who we have praised on this podcast many, many times. Emma has a tremendous ability to deal with the nuances of evangelical life and thought, and know that there are divisions within evangelicalism and tensions within evangelicalism, and that at some point you have to talk to people on both sides and let them hash this out. That's precisely what the Atlantic article didn't do. And in the end, when you have an article that says this is a major trend in evangelicalism, and you don't have any quotes from people in the Southern Baptist Convention and the Assemblies of God, from seminary and college faculty that would be crucial to observing and understanding these sorts of things, Christian publishers, etc., that's a pretty big God-shaped hole, in this piece. So it's an important piece. People should be reading it, and people should be reacting to it. I just wanted some of that reaction and truth-telling and sifting to go on in the article itself. Because I think there are going to be a lot of readers who finish this article and think, well, there go those evangelicals again. They gave us Donald Trump, and now they're going even further. Early in my piece, I put it this way. I hate to quote myself, but I think this is the heart of this thing. It's almost as if evangelicals are playing, for some strategic minds on the left, the same sick, oversized role in American life that some evangelicals assigned to Hillary Clinton, George Soros, Bill Gates, and all those liberal Southern Baptist intellectuals who love Johnny Cash and Jane Austen. I mean, I think evangelicals are now haunting the minds of liberals. So what this article ends up painting is a liberal conspiracy theory about the role that evangelicals are playing in conspiracy theories.
Who should LaFrance have talked to, or at least quoted?
Well, one of the persons who has spoken out in a piece written from the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton is Ed Stetzer. And he would leap quickly to mind. Karen Swallow Pryor leaps to mind. More than anyone else, though,
Now, the people he just named, I don't know if I even know who they are. So they can speak, I understand what he's trying to say. The article may paint the picture, this is what's happening in evangelicalism. Now, I'll make it very clear. My contention is this is creeping into evangelicalism. How far it will spread, we do not know. Now, guess what? If you want it to stop spreading, then you need the so-called leaders to silence it, to come out against it. But I will argue that many evangelical leaders have been very quiet when addressing conspiratorial thinking. Now, maybe there's some out there that have, but it just seems like I've always been fighting this battle. Hey, Christians, stop with this conspiratorial nonsense. Stop with this conspiratorial nonsense. Hey, watch this Alex Jones. Stay away from that. And it just seems like it's always like, go away, go away, go away. You're crazy. You're crazy. You don't understand what's really happening. You don't understand what's really happening. I remember back when I was on Sermon Audio, there was widespread conspiratorial thinking on Sermon Audio. Widespread conspiratorial thinking. I don't know if it's been purged. There was some crazy stuff going on. I mean, there was discussions like the flu vaccines going to, I can't remember the things they said was going to put inside your body. I mean, just crazy nonsense that was going on. And I would try to correct it, and I would try to correct it, and I would try to correct it. And typically the hate would come at me. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? So I understand what he's saying, that maybe this article is trying to paint that all evangelicals are like that, and maybe that's not fair. But again, just because you get some evangelical leader to go, oh, this is nonsense, we don't believe that evangelical leader cannot speak for evangelicalism. That leader has no power over what is happening in the local church. If you want to know what's going on, you got to listen. You got to get past the so-called leaders. You got to get down to what's going on in local churches. Start listening to sermons. Start listening. Start talking to people to go to church. Hear, and then when you start hearing it, it may not be called QAnon, but you can hear the influence of it. I view trying to figure out the influence of something very different than the way he does. He wants to go to the leaders. The leaders will tell you. The leaders are clueless. The leaders are clueless. So, and the leaders don't speak for anyone. What's going on in the church has to be determined from the bottom up, not from the top down. It's from the bottom up. That's where you go, oh, okay, oh, I see what's going on. I'm starting to hear it spread. Those small ministries that were on Sermon Audio, little, pastors and small churches, you start hearing it, and you're like, oh, there it goes. Oh, there it is. Oh, wait, there it is. Wait, there it is. And then you start beginning to see it spread. So he's like, go to these two leaders that I bet you 95% of my audience don't even have a clue who they are. But let's go to them because they speak for all the small churches here in West Texas. No, No, they don't. Probably the churches here in West Texas don't even know the two leaders he spoke of. So how are they influential? So I don't know. Just this is an interesting. You're getting a different perspective. What he's offering is a very different perspective than what I'm offering. Here we go.
Have Thomas Kidd, the historian at Baylor, who has that very well-read book this year called A Crisis in Evangelicalism, or Evangelicalism, a Movement in Crisis. I mean, if you went looking right now for people who would know the history of apocalyptic thought in evangelicalism and the many previous times it has gotten messed up in political thinking and ideas, rumors of wars, etc., it would be Thomas Kidd. But, I mean, it would be very easy to come up with 5, 6, 10 people out of any quick Google search for like evangelical history, Trump, crisis. I mean, that's just talking off the top of my head. But you would see many names come up. Call up Al Mohler at Southern Seminary. This might be something that Russell Moore could talk about. He certainly has been outspoken on the alt-right. Russell Moore, the spokesperson for the Southern Baptist Convention in Washington.
Now, Albert Mohler, Russell Moore, definitely heard those names. Definitely have heard those names. Albert Moore, and the reason I know Albert Moore, guess why? Podcast. Yeah, if they have a podcast, I've probably heard of them. If they don't have a podcast, I probably don't know who they are. So Albert Mohler would be that would be an interesting one to talk to about QAnon. I'd have to go to his podcast, the Daily Briefing, to see if he's addressed QAnon. I bet you he will address, if he hasn't addressed this article, I'm going to make a prediction. I don't know if he's off on Monday for Memorial Day. I bet you before this coming week, I bet you he addresses that Atlantic Journal this coming week. I bet you he does. I can almost guarantee you he will. Now, how influential he is? Well, there you go. I don't know. I bet you I could poll 300 Christians and say, do you listen to the Albert Mohler podcast? And I bet you probably 280 of them would be like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So again, then does he even speak for us? But I understand what he's saying. Having these evangelical leaders in the article would have added a different perspective, which you can't argue against that. I just think that he's giving it he's thinking that proves something, and I don't think it proves anything.
It's not hard to come up with some names of people who could address this.
Terry, are there some basic journalism principles on how you go about covering a conspiracy theory?
Well, I mean, the main thing you have to establish is some on-the-record body of facts showing how influential the conspiracy theory is. And I think this article does a decent job of showing that influence in terms of political arguments on the right. And I think it does a good job of showing that in the many siloed world of the internet, that this is something that is influencing some people. It's out there. So I think it gets the politics right, and I think it gets the technology right. Where this on-the-record voices of authority breaks down is with religion. And I know it's a common theme. I know I say it all the time. But if you try to look at politics and religion only through the eyes of politics, and if you deal with it primarily with voices who know a lot about politics but don't know much about religion, you end up with big, important parts of the equation missing. And in this case, readers should go through this with a highlighter pen, print it out and mark it up, and mark who the evangelical voices are. And there just aren't any, other than grassroots people who clearly have been influenced by this. Now, if you accept that Q himself or herself is an evangelical and that he's speaking out of some God-given sense of prophecy, okay, who's Q? And by the way, how do we know he's actually a sincere evangelical? I mean, we live in an era where some of the most influential names in conservative politics are people who talk to evangelicals. Yet it's very clear that they themselves, based on their lives, their beliefs, and other things that they say, that they're not evangelicals. Would you accept that Rush Limbaugh is an evangelical?
No, I don't think I would.
How about Donald Trump?
I don't think he fits the mold either, no.
I don't think he's certainly not walking the talk, and when he tries to talk the talk, he seems to be speaking in an unknown tongue. Now, Vice President Pence, yeah, there's somebody who's got his evangelical bona fides, and you can follow them right back into his political career in Congress and as a governor. So it's not hard to get voices of authority that can talk to you about the influence of evangelicalism on Mike Pence. But these other people in this article, I don't think it adds up.
Finally, with only about 30 seconds, did this article give us something, I had not heard this term before, that may be sticking with us, which is the term political cult?
Oh, there have been political cults for a long time. The issue to me is whether or not this has the staying power to be some sort of alternative, rebellious religion in American life. And I would say come back about 3 months after the next election, and I'll discuss that question with you. But I'm betting that it doesn't.
Terry Mattingly is Senior Fellow at the Overby Center at the University of Mississippi. He is author of the weekly On Religion column for the Universal Syndicate and the book Pop Goes Religion. He's founder and editor of Get Religion. Terry, thanks for your time.
There you have it. Now, I'm going to offer a different prediction. QAnon, this movement, listen, I don't know if I predict it probably, I'm going to predict that it probably will not become super influential by name. Listen to what I'm about to say, by name. In other words, the QAnon, that phenomenon, ultimately that will probably lose favor, and it'll stop being the flavor of the month, flavor of the half of a year, whatever. People will move on. But the ideas, the concepts, this conspiratorial thinking, the political hijacking of the church, I believe will continue to accelerate to evangelicalism, to use that term. Is going to stop being a quote-unquote religious movement until it becomes basically a political ideology and a political philosophy where you throw in a little Jesus and you rip scriptures out of context, and you still call yourself Christians, but it's a hybrid form of Christianity. Christianity is transforming, and we're seeing we've got such biblical illiteracy and theological illiteracy and church history illiteracy that Christianity is beginning to change and evolve and transform into something that's no longer biblical Christianity. That is the issue. That is the problem. And so QAnon is just a symptom of a deeper problem. There is a spiritual problem in the church. People are looking for something else. They're looking to political wisdom, political ideology. They're looking for all these cultural ways of thinking and not biblical way of thinking. Until the church can get back to being a church and remove all of this way of thinking out of the church, we are in trouble. QAnon, whether it spreads or becomes rooted way in and becomes major influential, even if it doesn't, the ideas and the conspiratorial thinking and the political hijacking, that is going to continue to spread and continue to grow. Because here's what's happening. As the world becomes more and more post-Christian, post-truth, post-reality. I mean, we got a culture who doesn't like the idea of truth. They don't even like the idea of reality. You can identify to whatever you want, even if it doesn't coincide with reality. And the world is moving away from a Christian influence when it comes to everything you can think about, from sexuality to everything. Christians are going to find themselves more and more engaging in cultural battles and political battles instead of fighting a spiritual war. All right, and that will ultimately lead to the destruction of biblical Christianity, not completely, but as being very visible. Biblical Christianity is going to go underground, I think, and you're going to have a form of Christianity that no longer holds any actual truth and power of biblical Christianity. That is where I see it going. That's what I see is happening, because we're allowing Christianity to literally be redefined. We're allowing Christianity to become a political, conspiratorial movement. QAnon is just a symptom. I don't know how long it will last, but its ideas and its thinking will continue to infiltrate Christianity. That's where I see it going. I could change my mind tomorrow, and I have every right to do so. But if you were to ask me what I'm thinking right now, and I'm just trying to use some educated guessing, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, that's what I can, and I've been yelling about this forever. So this is nothing new for me to say it now. I've been talking about this for a very long time. All right. Email me your thoughts. newsif@yahoo.com. 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 I know you may have wanted to talk about something else on a Saturday afternoon, but I wanted to at least advance the conversation. Once I mention something, I like to follow it to the end and try to give you as many different perspectives as possible. And, well, now you have a lot of things to think about. I'll stop right there. Everyone have a great day. God bless.